Télérama.
Leaving the conclusions to the reader. I'm used to being publicised, not that.
No.
My husband is, well, he's required to speak publicly.
I have received Dick.
Perhaps he should change jobs.
He can't.
The time that remains. Is this a question?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a mystery. I don't know. It's important to me, really, that it's to do with probably my children and their generation now. You know, I feel like I've had a very, very good innings, and I'm not done. And I hope that it's that my best work is ahead of me. But more and more, I find I'm focused on people coming after me now. That's not because I have a great generosity of spirit. It's because I have children. I think it's very common, really, once you're a parent. Brightwide. Brightwide is a website that I've set up with some colleagues and with my wife to try to highlight social and political cinema. This came about because I've been doing campaign work for many years, and very often the organizations who try to get a message across find it increasingly difficult to do so. You know, that we are bombarded with different media. So you try T-shirts or slogans or petitions or marches or posters, and they have very limited impact. At the same time, I've been to film festivals and I've seen films have an incredible impact, and a lot of people, particularly young people, standing up at the end of the film saying, where do we go? Where do we march? What do we sign? Who do we join? What can we do about this issue? And then the energy dissipates. This is an attempt to bring it together, so we have a library of social political films. When you watch it, you are given a series of options to navigate to an NGO. It may be Oxfam, it may be the Red Cross, it may be Médecins Sans Frontières, World Wildlife Fund, and there will be a discussion online, various people commenting, but there will also be options to take action, and I would like to see the opportunity for action. Also, at the same time, the NGOs, who we have a formal partnership with, 4 of the major NGOs, will have a way to get to Brightwide, so that if they have an issue, child soldiers in the Sudan, women's rights, human rights in Iran, there will be, you can go to Brightwide and see a movie that deals with this particular subject. So we keep a kind of conversation going between film and action. Verses you live with? You mean poetry? I constantly go back to T.S. Eliot and Rilke, Simon Armitage, Mark Strand. I never remember poems. I'm not one of these people that memorizes poetry. But
it's important in your life.
It is in my life. Yeah, I guess it's important. When I was young, I was fairly obsessed with poetry. It was the poems of, I suppose, at the beginning it was when I was a teenager, Rimbaud, Pablo Neruda, the usual stuff of young people. Even T.S. Eliot, I think, was somebody that children respond to. And so I haven't progressed very much, really. And I'd hate poetry unless I love it. I don't like poetry that... I don't quite like anything. So unless it has to be in a very, very particular zone of haunting. It can't be prose. But Simon Armitage and Mark Strand, to me, are two poets who I think are still alive, that I still involve myself with. But memorizing poetry almost defeats the purpose. It goes into my head, it has to pass out again. It's not... it has to be a very brief experience, really. I don't really want to carry it and speak it. The way people memorize great tracts of Shakespeare, it doesn't interest me, really. Being gay, don't know too much about it, but it's something which has started my career. So we're in a bookend moment, really. The first role I ever played was a gay role, and so the last role of anything that came out is also a gay role. So being gay has been a wonderful kind of career Viagra. Doug Bogarde or Monty Clift? Now that's a terribly difficult one. For me, probably Monty Clift. I love his tortured quality. Place in the Sun is one of my favorite films, and I think that there's something very, very interesting about such a beautiful, complex man, the image of a man like that in his sort of extraordinary conflict. I think Doug Bogarde was probably equally conflicted. And I adore both these men. I think that I love his writing really as much as his acting. And he has a delicacy about him. And he expresses a very lightly he expresses a very light intellect. I don't mean a light intellect, but he lightly expresses his intellect. Have you ever felt typecast? Sometimes when people talk to me, give me an overview about my work, and they look back at my work, they find it too easy to talk to me in a way as if they think I've been typecast. I've never felt it, though. I don't think I've done roles which have been less satisfying, but I've never done a role and felt like I've done it before. It always feels specific to me. So my experience and other people's perception operate in completely different ways. So I don't really... I feel trapped in that particular way. What's useful about fame? Getting a table. Well, I mean, in my profession, fame, whether we like it or not, is currency for employment. It's very difficult to stay working as an actor because we're hired hands, we're not usually proactive in what we do. Some actors are, of course. But I would say it's far more common to be in other people's hands, and in order to be hired, people have to feel that that their money is well spent on you, and that doesn't usually happen, and certainly in cinema, unless you have some degree of recognition. So it's useful in that respect. And this is something which I find a perpetual conflict. If you do campaign work, if you have political views, if you have, any agenda, which is to do with, social issues, then people come to you because of your fame. It's useful to them. How you use it, I think you have to be quite strategic, because people are very suspicious of actors and pop stars, and with a cause. So when people who have no voice come to you because your fame gives you a voice, it becomes increasingly an important question as to whether you say yes or no. To say no all the time, I think, is irresponsible and self-indulgent. And to say yes means you really have to know how you're going to do it. I haven't solved that problem, but it's definitely one that is ongoing. And so fame, I think, is useful to people who don't have it, for good reasons and bad reasons. In almost every other area, it's completely useless. It does nothing but cause restlessness and create interference with your life. Aren't you going to say something?
Are you kidding? It's spectacular.
What are you doing? Stop it. Stop it. I didn't think you were quite ready for life in a glass house.
Drapes, old man. You're the one who's always saying that we're invisible.
It's not exactly the Englishness of acting. I don't know. There are a lot of cliches about English acting. Repression, wit, the use of language, so-called classical training, a certain kind of elegance. They don't apply universally. I think those qualities can apply to French acting as well, and to American acting. I think it's... I don't really think we have a school of acting. I think that we have a tradition based on our literature, as it does every country. And we have certain ways to represent and satirize our own mannerisms. But I think it's wildly varied. It reflects, it may be quite specific to England, is class. We are very, very... I mean, every country has class divisions, but they're very, very clearly marked and very specifically identified in England. And I think that actors fall into categories according to their class, and it's very difficult to cross over from one to another. And films, it's a bit of a cliche to say it, but a lot of the films that deal with modern life in England, particularly the serious films dealing with modern life, are to do with working class modern life. They would be to do with struggling families in a low economy. If you talk about films like Nil by Mouth or the Ken Loach films, they very rarely deal with privileged people. But yeah, I would like to play people who are not of my own class. I don't see any reason why not. In fact, I don't really come from the class that I represent. I tend to be represented as a sort of middle or upper middle class person. My family is far more mixed than that. And like a lot of actors, I think we cross over into something we're not, which is great. I mean, this is where we reinvent ourselves. This is where we uproot ourselves. Laurence Olivier is not a king, you know. I know there are a lot of actors who are famous for for doing the kind of street films. They're more bourgeois than I am. And I think that's great. If you can escape the preconception, I think it's actually entirely healthy. Bergman or Cassavetes? I like Cassavetes. I don't know his work as well. But I like him. I admire him as a director and as an actor. But I became completely fixated with Bergman. It's strange because I couldn't watch a Bergman film for years. And I tried because I thought I should. And it's partly because I was a huge fan of Woody Allen, and Woody Allen kept talking about Bergman. So I thought I must understand what this is about. So I went into Bergman films, and of course this was on video. I very rarely had a chance to see them in the cinema. But 10 minutes would go by, and I thought, I don't have time. I don't have the patience. And then something broke through. And I think it's almost as if you have to slightly change channels to appreciate a Bergman film. Just to get yourself on a different pace. And I think it was the Autumn Sonata was the first one that really got me. Then I just felt everything else seemed irrelevant. I found them something one could watch over and over again, look at the moments. I mean, it's very difficult to talk about Bergman without sounding ridiculously pretentious, but I think the way he anatomizes human relationships, so here I go anyway,
The way he composes, his colour palette, all of it. It's been imitated a lot. I love ghost stories. And I love his perpetual use of, however you interpret it, I love his use of the supernatural. I find it frightening, haunting, truthful. And in fact, when I saw Festen, which I know it's not Swedish, I know it's Danish, and I know it's not exactly of the same tradition, because something about it reminded me of Bergman, I was convinced there was a ghost in that movie too. I was always expecting to see the ghost of the dead sister appearing out of behind the bathroom shower curtain or whatever. So, yeah, that's I guess that's a fairly convinced response to those two.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm sorry it was complicated in the middle. Okay.